Does Bendgate indicate we need tougher phones or tougher consumers?
And Microsoft leapfrogs to Windows 10, but can it make up for Windows 8?
Welcome to Vertical Hold, the tech show where we channel surf through the headlines in search of the big picture. I'm Alex Kidman, joined as always by a man who bends easily but doesn't break, Adam Turner. Adam, what's new in tech?
New iPads are expected from Apple on October 16. Along with the updated A8 processor, the new iPads are also expected to inherit the Touch ID fingerprint reader from the iPhones. Other rumoured devices include a Retina-capable iMac and possibly even an upgrade to the Apple TV set-top box.
Telstra's announced that the rollout of its public Wi-Fi hotspots will commence in November, using payphones at popular locations, which presumably means that there are actually some payphones left out there. It's also announced the branding for its version of its 700 MHz network, which it will dub 4GX. 4GX is a bit of a meaningless marketing term, kind of similar to the way it used to use NextG. And the 700 MHz network it launches won't be alone, because Optus also has its slice of the 700 MHz pie left over from analog TV spectrum.
Hotel chain Marriott International has been fined $600,000 for jamming guest Wi-Fi network at some of its US conference centres. The jam was intended to force guests to pay to use the hotel's Wi-Fi network, but the FCC regulator stepped in and slapped them with a fine.
The Vertigan panel report on the NBN has suggested that owners of new homes should pay for NBN connections, as well as strongly advocating for the removal of subsidies for NBN connections in the bush. Or in other words, even less of a national broadband network than we're already apparently getting.
So Alex, Apple's new iPhone 6 Plus is a little bit more bendy than it anticipated. What's going on there?
Well, it is a little bit more bendy than I think Apple would have liked, but the degree to which it is bendy and the degree to which Bendgate, and by the way people, stop appending things with gate, it's totally overblown. That aside, the degree to which Bendgate was actually a proper real thing that lots of people were suffering from was a little overblown. Apple's big claim was that it had only had 9 people actually say, hey, my 6 Plus is bent. Now, in the spirit of loving big props, and I do love a big prop, I have a big prop just here.
Yeah.
The 6 Plus. This is the 6 Plus I've been testing for the past couple of weeks. It's beautifully flat. I haven't been doing anything special with it. I haven't been leaving it on soft, fluffy pillows at night to ensure it retains its flatness. No, I've just been treating it like I would any other mobile phone. Having said that, it is a little bit worrying that a phone that could cost you, up to $1,249 can be bent. And there's a number of videos that have gone viral to this effect that, yeah, look, you can bend this thing with a bit of pressure. And also equally, there have been idiots going into Apple stores to test this out. Again, idiots. You're being idiots. It's just destructive. It's twerpishness.
So the ones that got bent, did they tend to be in people's back pockets, or how did it happen?
There were mixed reports on this. There were people who were sticking them in their back pockets. And again, I don't get sticking a phone in your back pocket.
I don't have a lot of sympathy for those people, to be honest. It's a pretty stupid thing to do with your phone, whatever brand it is, to stick it in your back pocket and then sit on it. Yeah, and if your phone can actually take your weight, you're probably very, very feather light. But at the same time, yeah, to me that's asking for trouble. But having said that, there were reports later on of people who had them in front pockets and bent them. I don't know how heavily to run with that, but I do think it kind of highlights this issue where phones are breakable things, and I think people generally realise that. But it's particularly galling when you've got a brand new phone and you break it. And all of the new iPhone models are by very definition new. Nobody's had one for more than a couple of weeks unless you happen to work internally at Apple. And even then you weren't allowed to actually say you had one, and I'm sure they're not going to release the bend statistics on those particular models. You couldn't take it to a bar or anything like that.
Exactly. Well, you wouldn't want to, no.
Yeah.
But it raises this kind of spectre of whether or not, well, A, these things should be built more robust in the first place, or B, cases should be a necessity. Where do you sit on the whole kind of have a case or not have a case thing?
Well, the iPhone seems to be sturdy enough that you would be surprised that the amount of force it would take to bend an iPhone, you'd think would be the amount of force it would take to bend most cases, unless it's really one of those industrial, worksite kind of cases.
cases don't tend to be that tough. You shouldn't really need a case to stop your iPhone from bending. I can understand maybe if you want to protect the screen, but the basic structural integrity, the phone alone should be able to stand up that. No one wants their phone to be this thick just so it won't bend.
Yeah, and I mean, I suppose there's a logical kind of tensile strength there, where if you're going to build a phone out of metal, metal has, you know, a bending point, and this is a particularly large phone. Apparently, the regular 6 does not have the same issues with strength as the 6 Plus. It's to do with the size and scale of it, and then the forces applied. There appears to be a weak point. I think it's around where the volume buttons are.
Well, maybe Apple needs to walk away from its obsession with having every phone being the thinnest phone ever. When was the last time you heard someone complain that the iPhone...
That's not just Apple, though. Everyone likes to say, this is the thinnest phone you can buy. Everyone from Huawei to Samsung to LG, everyone's in this particular game, and it seems to sell phones.
But the thing is with Apple is that considering that they have one of the worst battery lives out of most devices, when you hear people complain about iPhones, they don't complain that they're too thick, they complain that the battery doesn't last long enough. Maybe if they made it a millimetre or two thicker, put in a bigger battery, the battery would last longer. As you say, it wouldn't bend as much. You're not going to get complaints. I think maybe it's time to put the obsession with thin aside and think more about structural integrity and battery life.
Yeah, perhaps. There's also, of course, the interesting local angle with this, and this is something that I haven't seen a great deal on, and that's what exactly Apple would do under Australian consumer law. Because our consumer law is actually... Yeah, because our consumer law is quite strict on this stuff. Goods should be fit for purpose. I don't think it's unreasonable to say, well, look, a phone should fit into a pocket. Now, these may have been isolated incidents. As I said at the start, I think this did get somewhat overblown because, hey, it's Apple. And Apple is the company that people either love or hate. There's very little in between in this. But a phone should be able to fit into your pocket and survive in your pocket. I think that is fit for purpose. As I say, I don't know because I don't know what Apple's response would be. I did chase them for an official comment, which they eventually begrudgingly gave me, but it was straight out of Cupertino, and it was literally just, if consumers have a problem, they should contact Apple. So certainly, if you're an Australian who has actually bent their 6 Plus, I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to find out what it is that Apple does if you go in and say, oh, this got bent. Because I think you do sit in that odd position, and obviously it's going to depend on what you did to bend it. If you stood there and bent it in your hands, nah, you're screwed. If you sat down on it, nah, I think you're screwed, because that's not reasonable use either. But if it did genuinely just bend in a bag or in a purse, and this would be the same, or a pocket, this would be the same for any manufacturer's phone, I hasten to add, then I think you'd have a pretty decent case to say, well, actually, fair use for a couple of weeks, this should not be happening to what is meant to be a premium priced device, because that's the other kind of, the language in consumer law is kind of vague. It's fit for purpose, appropriate to price. These are premium priced phones. Up until Samsung announced its Galaxy Edge pricing, the iPhone 6 Plus was the most expensive phone you could buy in Australia. So Adam, Microsoft's announced the next version of Windows, but the successor to Windows 8 isn't Windows 9. What's going on?
No, apparently the people at Microsoft think we're pretty stupid. They think, oh, everybody hates Windows 8, so they probably won't like Windows 9. I've got an idea.
They've seen all our Bing search results and know we're pretty stupid.
10. Yeah, let's call it Windows 10. They'll think it's, you know, we put the whole thing behind it. They really must think that we're dumb to fall for that. Apparently there was talk they might have even called it Windows 1, following the Xbox One sort of thing, which would be less insulting to your intelligence than jumping from 8 to 10.
There was that theory doing the rounds, though, that they had to avoid Windows 9 because there'd be all that legacy code that pointed to like Windows 95 or 98 that was like, you know, 9 asterisks to catch all of those versions, and if anyone had that kind of code, it was going to fall over in a screaming heap. I don't know how accurate that is.
That's thin.
It's got a slight apocryphal air to it, but
yes,
it's a nice theory.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, like, they've done a lot of damage to the brand with Windows 8. And the problem wasn't necessarily with Windows 8. The problem was with the way they managed it. The Metro interface, the touchscreen stuff, all of it, very nice. People just didn't want it shoved down their throats. And Microsoft, I was going to say arrogant, and surprisingly enough, the word Apple popped out of my mouth. Microsoft.
How do these things happen? It's a mystery.
Microsoft was so arrogant about it, like worse than Apple, enforcing change down people's throat. And most people were like, yeah, maybe I'm not ready to use that. I don't want to use it on a desktop. I don't, whatever. At Microsoft, we don't care. This is what we're doing. And they really shot themselves in the foot. And now Windows 10 actually is a step backwards because they've had to pull back on things like putting the start menu back and giving you the option to not boot into modern UI, which is some of this that they did with 8.1 anyway. But they've had to sort of pull back on that stuff and admit that, yes, I'm sorry, we went too far. If they had been less jerks to begin with and put all that stuff there but made it easier to opt out, then maybe Windows 10 could be more of a step forward rather than a step back, so they can sort of start again.
It is still pretty early days with the code, though. I mean, what they've released at the moment is more for their business customers, because they openly admit, hey, the business customers are where we make the really serious money.
Yeah. But people were telling them before Windows 8 even came out that it was going to be a problem. They wouldn't even listen when they said businesses don't want their desktop machines booting into modern UI. They just want to get all that rubbish out of the way, find the desktop and get on with their job. So it's taken them so long to listen. Bear in mind, 8 was
replacing Vista.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. But so, you know, they were used to not getting a lot done, I'll give you that. But yeah, so it's you're right, they do have to focus on those business customers, but it would have been smarter for them to listen in the first place. And will be interesting to see. Most of the early stuff about Windows 10 was like, oh, look, it's a lot like Windows 7, because they're trying to sort of clear the air and move forward. So the big question now is, from there, what do they actually do next? How do they make Windows 10 look like an upgrade to Windows 8 rather than a downgrade from Windows 8?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's a couple of interesting things. They've talked about Windows 10 being this whole kind of product family. So, and this is something they've been striving for a while with Windows Phone and so on, but they're saying that it's going to be much more integrated now than ever before, a single Windows App Store, but not necessarily you'll be running Windows 10 on a smartphone. They'll still be, you know, their own UI, and I think the Windows Phone UI is pretty smart, actually, so I don't think they need to do too much tweaking there. It'll be interesting to see where they push all of that, because what we've seen so far is just the stuff in a preview that they want to show to businesses, they want to keep businesses on board with. They could have a few little hooks at the consumer end when they do their consumer preview, which won't be, I think, until early next year at this stage.
Yeah, the idea of tying all the devices together was sort of what was behind Windows 8, though. They just kind of managed it badly because they wanted to turn everybody's computer into a tablet. And people have some of the same frustrations with Apple, that they seem to be trying to turn Macs into fancy, expensive iPads. So they're still continuing that idea, but it sounds like Microsoft's trying to find a better balance now, rather than trying to force everybody down the touchscreen sort of path. They're acknowledging that, yeah, okay, maybe sometimes you want your computer to be a computer, but combining the app stores will definitely be a step in the right direction. And that's where the future's going to come from, I think. That's where the innovation will be in 10, is the fact that you can seamlessly jump between your devices. And as you say, Windows Phone 8's really not that bad. So Surface Pro tablets are pretty slick. But Windows 8
Phone 8, not that bad. I'm sure they'll put that in the marketing materials.
But Windows 8 got such a bad response that it actually burnt the others. It damaged the reputation of the tablets and the phones, and so now they don't have that critical mass of users that would have really helped them make this step forward in combining the ecosystem. So they've got to undo a lot of damage before they can move forward.
There's also this rumour doing the rounds, though, that they're not going to charge for people upgrading from Windows 8. How much credence do you give that one?
Well, it sounds reasonable. Like, it sounds totally fair. If you suffered through Windows 8, you deserve a little bit of something. But it doesn't sound like Microsoft. I can see how they might give you a hefty discount, but I'd be very surprised if Microsoft started giving it away, because that would set a bad precedent for them. Apple's got more of the ecosystem. They can afford to give the OS away because they get so many other slices of the pie. When Microsoft doesn't have the tight hardware ecosystem and everything else, they do rely more on the money from Office and the money from Windows. So I doubt they'd be keen to
Yeah, but having said that, that's where Microsoft is clearly moving. They want to move into that kind of services and apps and taking little slices out of lots of things. You look at what they've actually done with Office, where you buy an Office 365 subscription, where previously you would have bought a CD, and heck, I can even remember when it came on floppies. I'm that old.
A lot of floppies, yeah.
Yeah, well, a heck of a lot of floppies, and you know, number 11 floppy was always the one that was corrupt for some reason. But those nostalgic memories aside, they're moving towards that kind of market, and I could see a certain sense in them saying, this is what we're going to do, especially as they've also made pushes with companies like HP recently to do really low-cost notebooks to kind of push away Chromebooks, because Google effectively gives away that operating system. So I don't think it's impossible. I agree with you, it doesn't feel very Microsoft, but I do have the suspicion that Windows 10 will either be low cost, and I would not be utterly surprised if it was no cost. Well, that just about wraps it up for another episode of Vertical Hold. I'm off to buy a sturdy case to keep Adam in.
Not the cheap ones though, they really chafe.